always great talking to you, man. How are you doing?
I'm good, Rudy. I feel like it's been a while. I'm
It
doing good
has,
though.
because we talked about last time we talked was I think your last release. We did it over Zoom, and that was actually a couple of years ago. And I think it could have been in between the pandemic. I'm not sure, but I know the last interview we did was on Zoom.
It was, and it had to have been pandemic because I never used Zoom before that. So
Same here. But I'll tell you something, man. For me, it's God sent because I don't have to do the running around anymore unless I have to. Just do it like this, and I'm all good, man. But how's the family? How's everybody else?
they're good. They're at school. That's the best part of the day.
Man, did you ever
Not if
think
you
when
ask
we
them, but
did you ever think when we first met, that has to be at least 20, 15, 20 years ago? Got to be at least 20 years ago. I would say 20 years ago.
yeah,
That
at least.
we would be talking about kids, family, things like that. When at the time, man, you were becoming one of the prolific Canadian artist, storyteller, innovator. And me, I'm just trying to get behind you, man, to do interviews and stuff like that. Do you think we would reach to this point? We're talking about kids, family, and going, man, we survived all this time.
Well, I have to kind of flip that around because once you have you don't remember what your life was like before that. So that's I know that I understand what you're saying, that there was this time in my life where I didn't have three kids who completely ruled. I almost said ruined. What I meant was
Rule.
ruled my life. But I know that somewhere back there, deep in this vault in my memory, there was a time of yeah, whatever those years were, wild abandon.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. But it's funny. I was talking to Tom Cochran
Mhm.
yesterday because he's playing at Fallsview Casino, and we're talking a little bit about his career. And I was thinking about him, and I was thinking about Blue Rodeo, and I put you in that aspect of, and even with the Gordon Lightfoots, and telling amazing stories through your music. One of the things I talked to Tom about was if this was a little bit of a lost art these days.
Mhm.
And he gave me a great answer. That's not the question I want to ask you, but
Mhm.
I do want to ask you, though, how does it feel being part of that legacy, that Canadian legacy of being able to tell great stories through your music, where in truth, you don't need video, you don't need anything else. You make music where you can listen from beginning to end, and it's such a journey to
Mhm.
listen through, whether it be lyrically or musically.
Well, I mean, I'm still a sort of junior member of that grand Canadian family, but thank you for throwing me into the mix with those with such illustrious company for sure. But I think, to your point about it's what draws me to songs and songwriters is very much that the sort of the idea that through music a story can be told and delivered in a way the music becomes a sort of this method of delivery that goes straight. It bypasses everything and goes straight into your heart. And if you can tell a story with that, it means you're delivering that story to a very profound place in somebody's mind and their lives, and in a way that only music can do. So once you start, first of all, it's an art that can't be perfected, but you can work on it your entire life. And I think that that's what I've embraced as a songwriter, is this idea that I will just be constantly working on that process, on refining the story, refining the music in a way that it makes not just myself but the other person out there feel as close to what I'm trying to make them feel as possible. And it's a never ending process, learning experience and journey. And each record is representative, I hope, of a step forward. Again, knowing that there's no end goal, knowing that you can never arrive where you're trying to get to, but that's nevertheless, it feels like a step forward from the last one.
Always is, man. And it started from the beginning. That's what we're celebrating right now. 20 years ago, man, debut album. That's when we met. And I've got photos of us too, man, in studio doing interviews, in hotels. I know I've got a picture of you and I on the via rail when we were heading to the Junos in Ottawa. Like I've got a lot of stuff,
Do you
man.
remember that train? That train, the
Oh,
Juno train was one of the most debaucherous experiences I've ever had. And I don't know if you remember, but the I didn't know in those days that press was going to be such a big part of what you do. And as a musician, if you're, I guess if you're lucky, if people actually want to talk to you about what you're doing, then you got to consider that an opportunity. But at the same time, I got on that train not knowing what I was getting into. So we were at the back hanging out with all
yeah.
the bands, and it was like 10 o'clock in the morning, but we were all, having a really good time. And then all of a sudden, publicist from our record company, again, this is a very new relationship, and came up and she tapped me on the shoulder and she's like, "Hey, it's your turn in the press car." And I'm three sheets to the wind. And next thing you know, I'm there, and I've seen footage of some of those interviews, and I'm just shooting my mouth off about, you know, in the kind of way that I guess when you're younger and you're just, you know, you throw caution to the wind every time you open your mouth, and and I was shocked at some of the things that came out of my mouth. And then as we got out of the train, uh, I think I was trying to take a page out of like Noel and Liam Gallagher's book in those days, where it's just like you've got to be bold, you got to be brash all the time. But yeah, we got off the train, and somebody from the Ottawa Sun or whatever snapped a picture, and I had like a big glass of red wine and red eyes, and that ended up like, because it was Ottawa's Junos, it ended up on the cover of the paper, and my mom saw that.
Oh,
She's like, you know, what are you up to out there? And yeah, so the Juno train. But I'm glad you were there. That was a little moment in Canadian music history.
just so you know, I still have the interview on MIDI disc that we did. And yeah, and just so you know, because back then I didn't stay, the station didn't pay for me to go to the Junos.
Mm-hmm.
So I was on the train, did all my interviews, got to Ottawa, and then had to take an all-night bus back to Toronto.
That's an even more epic journey.
Oh man, but that's the way we did it back then, man. And that's the stuff that I miss most, because it was such, guerrilla play. You didn't know what was going on, you didn't know what was happening. But man, what great memories. Your debut album, man, was a great memory too. Who you were back then and who you became were great memories too. What was it about that album, do you think, that really helped introduce you to Canada and the rest of the world as one of the leaders in Canadian music?
I think in a lot of ways, it's just, first of all, that album was a decade in the making, whereas every album ever since then, you have a few years to sort of find the music, find the songs. But that record was sort of an amalgamation of all these songs that I'd been either working on or sort of collecting, that had never found a way out before, because we just didn't have the outlet. We'd put a few songs on a sort of EP here and there. We'd press a 7-inch vinyl and sell 50 of them and sell them at shows. And so that record was really a culmination of the first chapter of our band, and in that sense, you've had the time to sort of live with that music and sort of, I guess, develop it into something, into whatever it became. But also the fact that there's a lot of excitement around the kind of music that bands were making at the time, and we were lucky enough to sort of tap into that momentum. And rock and roll music that in those days had its place right up there at the top, in the top sort of strata of the music world, and was given the same real estate, in terms of press and media publicity, and that, which is not necessarily the case given to to bands playing, you know, sort of guitar driven rock and roll music today. So I think we were very lucky in that, you know, we just happened to be there at the right time.
Did it ever bother you that, and I no disrespect to the genre of alternative, but I
Mhm,
always hate when somebody is put in alternative because media doesn't know how to
mhm,
describe them, so they just go to alternative. I always considered you a rock and roll. Actually, I
mhm,
considered you a rock and roll slash blues band, which is one of the reasons why I decided to wear Rolling Stones, because Rolling Stones
mhm,
is a rock and roll soul blues band. I
mhm.
always considered you a rock and roll blues band. What did you consider yourselves back then? And even as the days went on, again, no disrespect to the word alternative, but I hate that word
Mhm.
because I always feel like you can't figure out where to put them.
Yeah, it's not my favorite either, to be honest with you. And I think that I like the term rock and roll because it can be this beautiful big umbrella and it can
Yeah.
encompass so many things. And so many bands that I like that I consider to be rock and roll bands. You know, if you look at they seem to come from completely different ends of the spectrum, really. But it provides you with an opportunity to sort of explore a lot of different musical avenues and draw with, you know, have a pretty wide range of, you know, color on your palette when it comes to writing music. So yeah, I mean, I think like any band who's trying to have an interesting journey as a, you know, in terms of their career, you can't, the more labels you sort of put on yourself, the narrower your path becomes and the more difficult it becomes to sort of forge ahead. So we try to keep it as open as possible. And that's why every new album is an opportunity to sort of widen that path a little bit, and just draw from different places that you know, wherever you find your inspiration. So yeah, I think uh, I absolutely grew up listening to some amazing bands from the 60s and 70s, like the Kinks and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and all of them. They had their roots in American blues music, but channeled it through whatever their experiences, whether it's from Northern England or from London, and just the same way that the Guess Who did the same thing in Canada. But then, you know, you mentioned Gordon Lightfoot, sort of these iconic storytelling singer-songwriters, like again, Gordon Lightfoot or Paul Simon, uh, who made me want to sit down with an acoustic guitar from time to time and sort of expand the range of what I consider to be a great song, and how to try to find some of that in what I was trying to do. So again, just keeping that canvas really broad and open, and not feeling like I have to go one way or the other. Just go where your heart tells you, you know, as sort of vague as that sounds. That's your sort of your that's how you take your temperature as a songwriter. Is like, is it making you feel something? And if it makes you feel something, well, just go further. And as soon as it stops making you feel something, then don't be afraid to retrace your steps and go back to that point where you still felt connected to what you were doing. And that's still how I write every single song to this day.
Can we say that about the new album? And congratulations on that, man. I want to make it
Thank you.
official at this point. What's the name of the new album and how does it represent you 20 years later?
Yeah, which is scary to think about. But the album is called The Adventures of Ben Blank, and the idea being, you know, this through this character Ben Blank, there's this opportunity. In the first song, he actually sort of says that he's leaving his name, his identity in the river, and he's walking on into the future as this sort of uh, unshackled, untethered to his past and his history, and walking out into the world and the future as a sort of undefined quantity, and seeing how he can fill in his life with new experiences. And I think, you know, maybe it's not a coincidence that 20 plus years into our own path, that there's this craving of you know, the idea of renewal and um, finding a new perspective on something that's very familiar. And again, I think this record is very much focused on that idea of not necessarily starting over, but um, allowing for the new to be a part of your way of living.
Is that what Afterlife, your single, represents with this album?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to sort of, it's the album's made in a way, it's kind of hard to pick one song out of it. You have to sort of go
Yeah.
on the journey, you
Just
know.
like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, you do. You have to go on the journey because at that point, hopefully you're more familiar with who this person is, you know, and why this idea of sort of living very much in the moment is important to them, and not putting everything off to a better time ahead. That the here and now is where you have to focus your energy, and I think that's what that song is all about. Not
I
being
love it, man.
like we're not quite done yet, you know.
Never. What's going on with you tour wise? And are you ever going to be home on New Year's Eve? Because
I don't
I
think so.
always see you're always performing New Year's Eve, man.
Yeah, and we picked the coldest spot. Where's it going to be the coldest on New Year's Eve, and let's go there, so that we can pretend that we can still play guitar when it's -20 outside, and you're just sliding past the frets that you're supposed to be hitting, and it's like this crazy like nightmare circus music. But for some reason, as Canadians, we're all kind of gluttons for punishment, you know, and we figure that we have to prove to the rest of the world that we can have a good time out there in the cold on New Year's Eve. So yeah, I don't know where we'll be this year. I hope somewhere. But yeah, it's been a while that I've rang in the new year.
Cannot wait, man. At somewhere. You're going to be doing it at somewhere. Look, as we're wrapping this up, um, just curious because as we speak, Halloween is coming up.
Mhm.
Do you take the kids out for trick or treat?
Well, I did. Do you think they're teenagers now? They don't want to have.
Oh,
I'm not allowed to go anywhere near them. So to cramp their style on Halloween is just definitely not happening. So, I'm just gonna be I'll be the guy at the door sort of handing out candy this year. But yeah, for years and years we had our route here in Montreal. We followed it faithfully every single year, but I know for a fact that this year they want nothing to do with me out there. So
oh.
yeah.
Do they know who you are to us? And if so, how do they react to that?
Oh, they know, but they don't. It doesn't seem to affect them in any way, shape, or form. Certainly not
Oh,
that, it's I don't there's no added reverence, you know what I mean? If anything, they're just
uh-huh.
like, Dad, you're not that popular, I'm like, okay, thanks for reminding me. That's great. You're not Drake, Dad. I'm like, I know. Every day I wake up in the morning, I know I'm not Drake.
Oh man. Well, you know what, man? No, you're not Drake. You're Sam Roberts, and that's
That's
what's
right.
important to us. And the memories and the fun and the music and everything else, man. Look, congratulations on your 20-year celebration on the
Thank you,
first
Rudy.
album. Congratulations with the release of this album. Congratulations on a stellar career. Thank you so much for telling such great stories. And for me personally, thank you for some of the best memories I've ever had with an artist.
Wow.
And I cannot wait till you and I can get together in person, man, because like I said, it's been a blast. And thank you so much for allowing me to follow you on your journey through my stage.
Thank you, Rudy, and thank you for again equally for all those memories. And I know there are plenty more lying, waiting for us. So it's always good to talk to you, though.